I'm Effie Parks. Welcome to Once Upon a Gene, the podcast. This is a place I created for us to connect and share the stories of our not-so-typical lives. Raising kids who are born with rare genetic syndromes and other types of disabilities can feel pretty isolating. What I know for sure is that when we can hear the triumphs and challenges from others who get it, we can find a lot more laughter, a lot more hope, and feel a lot less alone. I believe there are some magical healing powers that can happen for all of us through sharing our stories, and I'll take all the help I can get.
Once Upon a Gene is proud to be part of Bloodstream Media. Living in a family affected by rare and chronic illness can be isolating, and sometimes the best medicine is connecting to the voices of people who share your experience. This is why Bloodstream Media produces podcasts, blogs, and other forms of content for patients, families, and clinicians impacted by rare and chronic diseases. Visit bloodstreammedia.com to learn more.
Hello, and welcome to Once Upon a Gene. I'm your host, Effie Parks. And I don't know what time it is where you are, but I do know this. Rare parents forget to eat. Every time I ask my guest before a recording so I can work on the sound to tell me what they had for breakfast, I get silence. Not because their brain is mushy, okay? Maybe a little, but because they skipped breakfast. Again. So don't. Go pour a glass of water, maybe scramble some eggs, and put yourself on the same platter as the people you serve, okay? All right, so today's episode is about genetic testing and a new movement called Start Genetic. I'm really excited for you to get to know my guest. Many of you may already know her. She's a rare mom and co-founder of CureShank and the engine behind Start Genetic. She's also a mom to Charles, a 27-year-old living with Phelan-McDermid syndrome. So we get into a lot of the practical stuff, when to keep digging, what tests to ask for, when to retest, how a diagnosis changes care, maybe what to avoid. And I had a really great time talking to her, and I know you're just going to love her. So in this episode, we definitely have a couple asks, and we also leave you with some resources so you can act today. So please enjoy my conversation with Geraldine Bliss. Hi, Geraldine. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi. Thanks for having me. It's really great to be here. Excited.
Yes, I'm so glad we could align our schedules and make it happen. I know you've had a busy day and quite a busy year getting Start Genetic off the ground. But first, can you introduce yourself, Geraldine, as a mom and how you are here in the rare disease community?
So I have a 27-year-old son who has Phelan-McDermid syndrome. And when he was born, we didn't know anything was going on with him. When he was 2, he was a little bit delayed in speech, and he started to receive early childhood intervention services. And he did actually begin to acquire more and more language, but we recognized that some of his other delays, particularly social delays, appeared not to be linked to communication. And so that triggered a referral for an autism diagnosis. And he was diagnosed with autism when he was 4 years old. And we were kind of plugging along, doing our applied behavior analysis and speech therapy and all the things. And we were giving him some medication for ADHD at the recommendation of his teachers who were struggling with his kind of impulsivity. And he was having some weird reactions to the medications. And so we saw a special doctor who recommended doing some metabolic testing. So we came back to Houston and we saw the geneticist at Texas Children's. And he said, all these metabolic conditions are really rare. I don't know that we're going to find anything. But while we're hunting around, let's go ahead and do this brand new genetic test called a chromosomal microarray. And he said, I really don't think we're going to find anything, but let's just go ahead and do it anyway. And several weeks later, we got a call back from the genetics department, and they had found something. And it was a very, very small deletion on the terminal end of the 22nd chromosome. And that's an area that contains a gene called SHANK3. And if you're missing one copy of SHANK3, then you have Phelan-McDermid syndrome. And at that time, there were really just a couple hundred children in the world who had been diagnosed with it. Charles was one of the first children diagnosed at Baylor through chromosomal microarray. In fact, not just with Phelan-McDermid syndrome, but with any genetic condition. It had just received like CLIA approval, approval to be used on a clinical basis. And he was like one of the very first patients they diagnosed with anything through that technology. So it was a surprise to us, but it didn't change anything about Charles, right? He was still the same Charles. It just helped us make sense of everything that had been going on with him. So for us, it was a really wonderful thing to find out the genetic diagnosis. And then that quickly enabled us to connect with the patient foundation, the Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Foundation. Yeah.
You're an OG, Geraldine.
Yeah.
And so is Charles.
Yep.
What year was that you got the microarray?
That was like 2005, just when microarray came out. And so now Charles is 27. So he was like just about 7 years old when we got the diagnosis. So I'm seriously the OG. It's been 20 years.
And think about how lucky you are in that you would have not gotten a diagnosis had you had to actually have like an exome sequencing or a whole genome sequencing. If Phelan-McDermid wasn't picked up on a microarray, you would have had to wait much longer and then perhaps maybe not have even pursued it later.
Right. That is one of the challenges is sometimes like whole exome sequencing doesn't pick up small deletions. Usually whole genome sequencing will pick it up, but whole exome sequencing doesn't necessarily pick up those small deletions. So it was lucky that we have the chromosomal microarray. So
I'm looking at Charles's picture. He's so handsome. Look at his eyebrows. And I'm realizing I haven't had a Shank3 Phelan-McDermid episode yet. So we'll probably have to get one of those on the books. But if you would like to just explain a little bit about that disorder and the Cure Shank org.
Right. Happy. Yes. We'd love to tell you more about both. So Phelan-McDermid syndrome, as I mentioned, it's caused by the loss of the Shank3 gene. The patient community now has about 3,000 individuals in it. And most often, individuals with Phelan-McDermid syndrome have a diagnosis of autism. And the way they're diagnosed is that they see the right doctor, somebody, they're being evaluated for autism, and their doctor says, I think there might be recommendations for genetic testing for kids, in whom there's a suspicion of autism. And that's how kids normally get diagnosed. But I would say it's not just like a garden variety autism. Normally, it's paired with intellectual disability, usually on the more severe end of the spectrum. Most of our children also have hypotonia, especially very early in like infancy and early childhood. And about 40% of our patients go on to develop epilepsy. And in my son's case, it evolved into a really severe form of epilepsy called Lennox-Gastaut. And that was really what was such a compelling reason for me to get involved in research advocacy. But Phelan-McDermid syndrome is one of the most common genetic causes of autism. It occurs in about 1% of people who have a diagnosis of autism. And if you look in cohorts of people that have like autism and intellectual disability, Phelan-McDermid syndrome occurs in about 2% of that population. So that really does make it one of the most common genetic causes of autism. So, and that's probably one of the reasons why, you referred to us like earlier before we got started. Yes, we do have some clinical trials and we have some, quite a bit of research that's happened over the last many years. And part of it is because we do have a little bit of a larger population size than many of the other rare genetic conditions.
Great. So, thanks for going into that.
Yeah. And then Cure Shank, I and two other parents, moms, co-founded Cure Shank in 2019 with a very narrow mission, which was to accelerate drug development. And I formerly chair the research support committee of the Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Foundation, and it does a superb job of patient support. It has a wonderful family conference and many excellent patient support programs. As the community was growing, I really wanted more money to go into research. And yet, you know how it is running a rare disease organization. It's always like trying to stretch the budget to meet all the various needs. And so we decided we would create a separate organization that would have a very narrowly defined mission, just that would be very focused on drug development. And so we got our 501c3 approval from the IRS the last week of March 2020, after the pandemic had started. And we ended up not being able to launch with the big fundraisers that we had planned in Los Angeles and in Houston. So we ended up really taking the next year and a half or so just to do a really thorough landscape analysis. We put together an advisory board that included a few scientists, but not scientists working on Phelan-McDermid syndrome, scientists that were working on similar disorders. We just wanted to make sure that we wouldn't have any conflicts of interest or, end up funding anyone who was on our advisory board. So we selected scientists that were working just outside of our disorder. And then we also found some kind of industry people to help us. These are mostly either business development people or venture capitalists who served as our advisors. And we started doing a lot of phone calls with our advisors. We started calling academic investigators. We called companies, large pharma, biotech, and we started asking them, why aren't you creating a program in Phelan-McDermid syndrome? The answers were fairly consistent, actually. In general, the response was the science on SHANK3 and the clinical research on Phelan-McDermid syndrome is stellar. The problem is that companies are really scared about neuroscience, as you know, Effie. Companies are sometimes scared to invest in disorders of the brain, and especially if there aren't biomarkers and if there aren't good outcome measures that are very objective. And so that kind of gave us our marching orders when we got started in by then it was like close to 2021. So we developed the plan to sort of de-risk drug development. And a lot of it was just creating resources to help attract companies into our space. So we worked a lot on endpoints. And we developed a disease concept model, and then we held an externally led patient-focused drug development meeting and generated a voice of the patient report. And then after that, we quickly started moving into outcome measures and biomarkers. And that's kind of the space in which we've been working for the last few years. We put together a pre-competitive industry consortium so that companies that are interested in doing clinical trials in Phelan-McDermid syndrome can work together on the development of new outcome measures and biomarkers. So those are the main areas in which we've been working these last few years. And this year we're launching a new project, which is an accelerator. And I'll have more to share the next time I'm on your podcast.
Oh man, I'm just nodding in amazement with a big smile, Geraldine. What a ton of work. And nobody can see Geraldine but me. And she's just the cutest and the sweetest. And I can't believe she has a 27-year-old and has lived this stressful existence of leading a rare org in the way that you did. And just having so much grace, Geraldine, really.
Thank you.
It's really motivating to other parents to hear that.
Oh, thank you. It is incredibly stressful, and it can cut the legs out from under you. In my case, I just had to roll up my sleeves and figure out a path forward, because I think what's been going on with Charles, the severity of his epilepsy, the way it has robbed him of quality of life, the way he has lost language and lost skills, it is devastating to us every day. It is heartbreak. And, how do we cope with that? I mean, I could either let it just suck me down to the toilet bowl of life, or I can try to do something about it. And this little human being is so worthy of like everything. He's like the center of our family. He's really shaped so much of who we are as a family and individuals. And he has a little brother who's 25, and he's finishing up medical school and is applying for residency in child neurology. And I just look at like his brother, and he was completely influenced by Charles. Mm-hmm. And, anyway, I guess the point is, love Charles so much and want the best for him. So we fight hard in the ways that we can. It's hard work, but also I am so grateful. Now we have some really amazing things happening. We're in a clinical trial right now of a gene replacement therapy for Charles's condition. It's with a company called Jaguar Gene Therapy. And I have so much gratitude for that company and what they're doing. We have a phase 3 clinical trial about to start with a company called Neuron, and another one that just I wrote on LinkedIn a couple of years ago, I'm like, it's been like, I've been pushing a boulder uphill all these years. And now that boulder, I can't say it's like rolling on its own, but there's a little bit of momentum starting to build, and it's incredibly gratifying. And so every day when I sit down to do my work, I can just go, I am so thankful for all these, for the scientists that have worked so hard to build the science where it is, and for the companies that are kind of taking a chance on Phelan-McDermid syndrome. And anyway, things are moving along. It's good.
I love that. Congratulations for that relief,
Thank
because I know how
Yeah.
amazing that feels.
Yeah.
And what a beautiful family. Good job.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll switch gears a little bit, and
Yeah.
we're gonna talk about genetic testing, some of our favorite topics here in the biz. So we're gonna talk about Start Genetic. I feel like we just started having meetings about it only a few months ago, and then it was full blown ready to go in July, which is another thing that you added on top of your to-do list. I don't know how you did that. So let's talk about Start Genetic. Why did you have such a sense of urgency to get that out and tell everybody what it is?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think like lots of rare disease communities, we know that what we see in our patient community is just the tip of the iceberg, right? We have in PMS case, we have about 3,000 patients. In other rare diseases, they have 50 patients, right? But we know that underneath that little bit that's poking up above the water, that there are probably hundreds or thousands more patients that have this condition. And as we're all striving, to develop really good treatments for our patients, there's that knowledge that, oh my goodness, the only patients right now who are going to be able to access those treatments are the patients with the diagnosis. But underneath, there are thousands and thousands of other patients who won't be able to access those treatments. We have to do a better job of finding those patients for the benefit of those individuals and also our own communities, right? If we want to have successful clinical trials, we need to find a lot more patients. And we're seeing that right now, some of the clinical trials that we're recruiting for, even though we have a community size of 3,000, when companies have very specific recruitment criteria, it can be like hunting for a needle in a haystack, even in a larger rare disease. So we really need to get the word out there and try to build our own communities. I guess in some ways I would consider this sort of a child find initiative, like to help find more patients. The problem is that, like any other rare disease, we can't just shout out to the wind, hey, people, go get genetic testing. Our voice isn't strong enough, like to attract attention. But rare disease, when you add up all the different rare diseases, it's not rare at all, right? I mean, together, it's a big community, right? And so we thought what we need to do is organize a genetic testing awareness day and have all of our colleagues in rare diseases kind of all shouting on the same day, hey, people, you should know more about genetic testing. And so that was kind of the idea, was to sort of use kind of a public awareness campaign to elevate public awareness of genetic testing. That's what we set out to do. And yeah, indeed, we said we wanted to do it like a year ago. And in the spring, we started planning for it. And then by July, it was happening. So it was a lot of work in a really short amount of time.
Yeah. Well, I know you mentioned, just the ethical factor of like needing to give these treatments to the people who don't even know that it's available for them. But really, again, the other important point that you brought up was that patient groups have to gather more patients all the time. And I don't think in the beginning of when a patient organization starts that's necessarily one of the to-do list things that they're ticking, because there's so many things to do, right? And there's so many ways that you have to decide where you're going to lead your focus. But it is good for newer, smaller patient orgs to kind of have that at top of mind in the beginning, to always think about needing to sort of hunt for more patients, right? And to gather as many of them into your org as you can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. And that's hard, right? Because you don't know where those patients are coming from. And so what do many of us do? Maybe we connect with some of the larger hospitals where we know they do a great job of genetic testing, or we connect with the amazing Dr. Wendy Chung, who does genetic, is it like really groundbreaking in the work that she's doing to get kids tested. Or we connect with programs like Simon's Foundation, like Spark or Searchlight, right? Or some of us connect with some of the genetic testing platforms just to make sure that when they know about our organization and can refer newly diagnosed patients back to us. But each one of those will just yield a small number of patients, right? The return on investment from those efforts is so small, right? We have to do all of it, unfortunately, but there just have to be better ways of helping to find patients. So we kind of felt like, in general, I mean, most of us, before our own child was diagnosed with a genetic condition, how much do any of us know about genetics? Pretty much nobody knows anything about genetics until you have to learn about it. I would say, in general, public literacy about genetics is pretty low. And that's not just top of mind, when people are sitting around the dinner table or at the water cooler at work or whatever. So part of what we want to do with the campaign is get people thinking, oh, I've heard of genetic testing, or I saw this thing on TikTok and I saw a mom talking about her child who has autism. They found a cause for that child's autism. I think especially now, it's really important for people to find the truth, to be able to, turn to science and make discoveries about what really is underlying their health condition or their child's health issue.
I think I can honestly say that there isn't a single day that I am out in public and I don't mention genetic testing to someone randomly for whatever reason, depending on what we're talking about or whatever. I'm always talking about it. And I know 22 or whatever years ago, you said that it wouldn't change anything for Charles or how you take care of him or whatever. But would you say the same thing now when there's a family who says, oh, getting a genetic test won't change anything about how we do anything? Would you have a different answer to that statement now?
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't change anything about Charles. He's still the same human being, same wonderful person with both the same wonderful traits and the same flaws, right? It doesn't change who that person is. But yes, oh my gosh, it's such a game changer in terms of how it helps you cope with the disease. I mean, it gives you a patient, often, I can't say every genetic condition, but many of them have a wonderful patient community that you can turn to. And the people in that community are more knowledgeable about the disease than any doctor, right? When you need good information about how to manage something, the other families are the ones who know. And if, they know who are the right doctors you need to go see, what are the medications you need to avoid, what are the things you need to be watching out for. So that is strong medicine. Having a support community. I would say now in Phelan-McDermid syndrome, we actually have pretty good care guidelines, right? And this comes from knowledge, the doctors that have sort of been pulled into the Phelan-McDermid syndrome universe now are tracking these patients, and they're taking their expertise and their knowledge and they're publishing what they're learning about the disease. And now we have some guidelines for the care. And some of those guidelines are so essential. In Phelan-McDermid syndrome, we see this thing that happens sometimes in adolescence or early adulthood, where suddenly the patients start regressing. They lose skills that they had. There are usually some pretty severe psychiatric changes. And we now know that that's catatonia in most cases. And there are certain medications that need to be avoided in patients who have Phelan-McDermid syndrome or are presenting with signs of catatonia. That's not something that most doctors know about. Right. But, because we have those guidelines now and parents know about it, it's possible, as long as families are in the community, then they hear about that and can share that information with their doctor. And then probably, for us, we're now, as I mentioned, we have some clinical trials, and if all goes well with the clinical trials and the medications, are safe and effective and receive, regulatory approval, then those will be treatments that our patients will be able to access. Those will be precision medicine for our community. And that's what we're all waiting and hoping for, is those medications that really kind of target the underlying issues in our disease, either the underlying genetics or the underlying pathophysiology of our diseases. So for all those reasons, I think, yes, today having that genetic diagnosis changes everything.
Yeah, totally. Like you said, coping, community, medications to actually avoid, and then also, medications to try because the family knows what's working, opportunities for clinical trials. And then, even past that, it can ignite something in some sort of change or path forward for you as a family or, as an org or whatever. I mean, it's endless, and knowledge is power. We all know that. It's not cliche, but having a genetic answer to what's happening with your child. I honestly believe that there's still so many things that we're going to learn why it's so important than just kind of the baselines we have right now.
Yeah. I mean, okay, I just say, look at you. You have used your child's diagnosis to create this incredible platform, and you've touched thousands of people through, or probably tens of thousands, or maybe even hundreds of thousands of people through your podcast, right? And so you never know how that diagnosis, the way that it might touch your family or transform who you are as an individual or who your family, what your family's all about. And yeah, I'm not surprised that you, on a daily basis, you talk to people about genetic testing. I mean, I do that pretty often too.
Always, especially if they're like, oh yeah, my son has autism too. I'll be like, oh, do they? Like you just you can't help it. Like it's just part of our life. It's so deeply ingrained in like the conversations that we're all having all day, every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I've sent a lot of people over to a lot of places. So back to the families who are getting told that they don't necessarily need to dig deeper. Perhaps these are umbrella terms like epilepsy, autism, cerebral palsy, a mitochondrial disorder, even perhaps. What would you say to sort of push for that? Because sometimes that label is just left how it is. And also the wait and see responses from their medical professionals. And also maybe just the fear of the money and the insurance and future planning, I suppose. Or that might be a separate question.
Those are all the big questions. So, let's maybe start with kind of umbrella diagnoses like autism or epilepsy. Yeah, I think a lot of times, that's where doctors stop and sometimes where families stop, right? We've got our diagnosis, autism or epilepsy. And I mean, maybe that's okay. I mean, we can't always identify a genetic cause in every disorder, but in over 30% of cases of autism, you can identify like a single gene that's responsible for the autism. And about another, I think the figure's about another 50%, you can identify sort of a constellation of these variants that are not necessarily pathogenic on their own, but in combination, they can increase autism risk. Those are complicated to diagnose, and my intuition, my suspicion is that over the next several years, there's going to be a lot more research that kind of points to which combinations of genes may increase autism susceptibility. But in at least 35% of the cases, there is a single gene that can be identified and can provide an answer for what's going on. For families, often the genetic causes of autism result in sort of more complex forms of autism. I think what many of us would call severe or profound autism. And these are families who desperately need treatments. Their children are often, they have very, very limited communication skills, if any at all. They have usually some behavioral challenges, and often it can be self-injurious behaviors or aggressive behaviors. These can be really, really tough things for families to deal with. And so the approach that families and doctors often resort to is, well, first, they may use some behavioral interventions like applied behavior analysis or approaches like that, which can be very effective, but also extremely labor intensive, and sometimes they're not effective. So then families resort to medications, and they can try like a series of different medications. Often they don't work, right? And they have a lot of side effects. And so now we're kind of at the cusp of this we're entering the precision medicine era, where new medications that are tailored to the specific disease pathology related to that genetic condition should result in better medications that target the specific problems of that disease, while hopefully minimizing some of the effects of sort of more broad, broad stream or medications that are not that specific. So I think the other case where you really see that happening is in epilepsy, right? And my son's a perfect example of this. For years, we have used this trial and error approach to try to manage his seizures. He still has over 200 seizures a month. We have never been successful in getting that number lower. And it's not for want of trying. We have tried every medication, and he's done corpus callosotomy. He's had the thalamic RNS device. He's had multiple VNS devices. We've tried, CBD. We've tried ketogenic diet. You name it, we have tried it, and nothing has worked. And that's not a great approach. Trial and error is hard for families, and it's hard on the patients, right? The patients are experiencing a lot of side effects, and they're not getting a lot of benefits from the medications. But this idea with precision medicine is that we should be able to target the underlying pathology of the disease much more effectively and have medications that are very targeted to the specific genetic condition, and ideally will have a better outcome with fewer side effects for the individuals. So I don't know about cerebral palsy. I know that the recommendations for testing and cerebral palsy are very new, I think within the last couple of years. I don't really know what the uptake of that has been. I'm kind of curious to find out from you, Effie, since you're much more embedded in that community. But are y'all seeing the same thing with, like, right now people try different treatments to, various degrees of effectiveness, and then they're like, there's kind of a process of trial and error. And the hope is that precision medicines will give better results for individuals with cerebral palsy.
100%. I mean, I think that's the hope for all of us across the board. And yes, finally, cerebral palsy has been called to have genetic testing is frontline, right? Or is it frontline that I'm thinking of? Finally. I don't think there's necessarily guidelines yet like there is for epilepsy. But yes, if you're in the cerebral palsy community and there was no birth trauma, there was no oxygen loss, you have a clear MRI, and you're still there, what if you had CT and NB1? You don't know a lot of things. You don't know that your child perhaps is going to go completely blind one day if they don't have this specific eye test that you can only do under this dye. Because if they have this disease called fever, their retina eventually will detach and they go blind. But if you don't have that test and then know if you have it to where you would get laser treatments on it, your child will lose their vision. That's just one thing that if you don't, continue pursuing for genetic testing. Other things that are just kind of a gut punch is that most of our kids don't have adult teeth, and you're not even going to know that for years down the road. Whereas if you get that diagnosis early, you can sort of deal with that grief kind of when you're in the thick of the grief anyways, right? Which I find that compounding it a lot in the beginning especially, but getting as much information as possible to sort of mourn all those things is easier than having blow after blow after blow, as you go along and learn these things about the diseases. Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that happen to this huge population of people who have, quote, cerebral palsy, Dr. Kruer works out of University of Arizona, and he's the cerebral palsy genetic correlation genius, and he's been working on this forever. And I think the last thing he said was they think that perhaps up to 50% of people diagnosed with cerebral palsy have a genetic etiology, which is a lot of people. And like you said, there's just so many really specific things that we know about our kids when we have their genetic diagnosis that is just so vital to knowing earlier. It's just so important. I mean, it could save your child's life, literally.
Yeah. So, and you're saying CTTNB1? See, you're saying that there's a susceptibility to vision loss due to detached retinas, and that is unique to that genetic condition, but does not necessarily occur in other patients who have cerebral palsy.
Correct. Doesn't. It's
so
not one of the symptoms
actionable,
of CP.
Yeah.
Yes,
So very,
yes.
very actionable and very specific to the genetic condition, right? That's a very powerful reason for all patients with CP to get genetic testing.
Totally.
Right.
Which is why I think we actually qualified it in the end for our ICD code that should be out soon, is because of that, right? That's an actionable step you can do to better the life of a child. We only have to get into ICD codes.
Right.
Yeah, that's a huge deal. I've seen a couple of the children at our conferences who didn't have that information yet. The kids were missing an eye. It's a big deal, and it's painful. It's it's a degenerative sort of eye disease, right? So it's painful in lots of ways, and it can be.
I have to think
prevented.
It's hard enough. Yeah, it's got to be hard enough to navigate the world when you have other disabilities, right? And then to add something like reduced vision or vision loss completely, you know, something that could potentially be treated, managed beforehand. I mean, that would be a terrible blow. Yeah, it's a really compelling argument for genetic testing in cerebral palsy.
Yeah. So what do you want patient organizations to really do? Like if everyone did like your dream come true when you have this vision of Start Genetic, like what would everybody be doing every day to help push this forward?
Every day, talking
Tell them
about
what to
genetic
do.
testing, talking about genetic testing, using your platform to increase public knowledge and awareness of genetic testing. And I think especially on July 25th, July 25th is kind of the Start Genetic Testing Awareness Day. And we definitely want everybody to use their voice on that day so that we can have like a big volume shouting out about genetic testing. But I think every day groups can be talking about genetic testing, educating their constituents that are just outside of their organization. So, for instance, if your disease is associated with CP, being involved in the larger CP community and sharing about genetic testing, just like we try to do that in the autism community, right? So, getting the word out to those kind of, if you imagine your community is a small circle inside of a larger circle, and kind of getting the word out to those larger circles and showing them the value and the importance of genetic testing, what it means, talking about the treatments that are coming for your disorder or the care guidelines that are emerging in your disorder. All of those things can really help to convince people of the value of genetic testing. And like I said, Start Genetic, we really want everybody to use their social media platforms every July 25th, right, to raise awareness about genetic testing.
Yeah. Well, keep posting now so we can all still continuously share it, more than that once a year push. And I think about I know we had talked about what day to pick, but I kind of wish there was a school day where this was the day so we could go in and sort of educate, even starting, with the younger kids.
Yeah.
But I would also love to see this type of educational material in the waiting rooms at the doctor's offices, but especially at the children's hospitals, even when I go to Seattle Children's and I talk to so many families in the waiting rooms, even there, they don't know about genetic testing, with sick kids, people with sick kids. And I'm always just kind of mystified. And I wish there were pamphlets. So maybe we can get some Start Genetic pamphlets and we could all drop some paraphernalia off in at least the parent lounge or something.
Yeah. That's a great idea. And I hope that some of the people in the audience might be willing to sponsor Start Genetic so that we can, kind of take those next steps. I think there are other issues we haven't really talked about. And I know you're very familiar with some of the issues with access to genetic testing. I mean, I think sometimes you have people who know about genetic testing and are just having difficulty accessing it. Most states, the Medicaid programs, do cover genetic testing, but there's sort of a degree to which they will cover it. Some states are better at it, more comprehensive. Other states are not as good, and so that can be a challenge. Most insurance companies do cover genetic testing, but again, there can be barriers, especially if families have to pay a big copay or coinsurance, or if there's a big deductible they have to satisfy. And those can make it hard for people to decide to take the step to do genetic testing. And I know that those are tough choices for families. So, I don't know how we're going to overcome all the access issues.
I think it's 27 states Medicaid pays for genetic testing. Also, there's a link on my website. You should probably put it on yours too. Under my resource page, there's a link on my website that takes you to this partnership with GeneDx and Genome Medical, who offer telehealth. So you can get a telehealth appointment to then get a swab test mailed to your home and speak to a genetic counselor through telehealth. So I think that's going to be a really great way to sort of fill in that gap of, physical access, financial access. There's also financial aid in a lot of cases like that too. I know particularly with GeneDx too. So there's another avenue. Telehealth, I think, is really going to hopefully fix that issue.
I agree. And that's so important, especially I live in Texas and it's a big state and we have a lot of rural areas and we don't have very many geneticists outside of Dallas and Houston. And so it's hard for families in other areas to access genetic testing. I think the option through Genome Medical and GeneDx and others that are coming are going to be extremely helpful for families that live in areas where genetic testing might be difficult to access. So I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do have to mention that depending on symptoms too, you can also check it probablygenetic.com and fill out a short survey, and they offer free whole exome sequencing if you qualify too for that. And they also do genetic counseling afterwards. So there's a couple different sort of options, but you don't know about it unless you're kind of searching or if someone's telling you. So that's sort of the point, right, of Start Genetic, is to just really start talking about it, really start spreading awareness about it, kind of just get it in people's heads.
Yeah. Well, I have a question I want to ask you.
Sure.
Since you're good at this. I've been thinking about like how we can reach new audiences, people that maybe have not historically been part of either genetic research or really even in other medical research. And I'm wondering if there are kind of ways that we can sort of capture people's interest through social media. And if there are like fun trends or interesting things happening sort of in the larger culture that might be things that we can kind of latch on to help educate people about genetic testing. I'm like, how do you tap, what about that young mom? How do we capture her interest and, teach her about genetic testing? I'm just wondering, what are the clever ways that we can do that?
I mean, that's the question, right? I mean, who knows? I think lots of things could be tried. I mean, I think I personally would go up to a booth at a farmer's market that was like, do you know anything about genetic testing? Like, I would think, what is happening? And maybe they have something interesting to say. Like, what if we just start going to places where we never are and, pulling people in like that? I also think that it would be great if all of us, not all of us, but if any of us could sort of step up and do sort of educational sort of presentations, whether it is at a school or at a parents group or, those PEP groups or whatever, and just kind of took that torch and like just went a little further with it. Family planning. I mean, I think there's a really good argument to think about getting genetic testing for family planning, right? And to just sort of get the lay of the land. Not everyone wants to know anything, and I respect that, but like, what if you do? But yeah, new ways to, I don't know, because, there is a perhaps diagnosis at the end of it that could be life-altering. Right. So I don't know if it would necessarily be fun, if there's like a fun angle, but maybe. Maybe there is. I mean, I think that, back in the day, 23andMe had that fun angle, right? Where they were like, you should see where you came from. And that's kind of how they positioned it. And that worked. I mean, what they sell their company for, like something $1 billion. So maybe there's something there of just knowing, right? Like having information and getting cool, like points of your history in there.
Yeah.
But
well, this is a call to your audience. If anybody has any great ideas for how we can spread the gospel about genetic testing, please let us know.
Yeah, I mean, maybe for the sleuths, you can find out if anyone in your family, was a serial killer. That could be interesting for all our true crime junkies. Like, there could be cool stuff you could learn. Oh my gosh, I did listen to this podcast a couple years ago, and I can't remember what it was, but it was all about people getting genetic testing and finding out that their parent wasn't their parent. And so someone would eventually find out their parent. But it was like 100 episodes of just every family talking about how they got a genetic test and then found out they didn't have the parent. I mean, it makes for some great sort of reality TV stories. So there's some people that like that too. I'm just workshopping it for you, Geraldine. I don't know, but I'll think about it.
Okay. Well, I put it out there to the world now. Anybody who's got any great ideas, social media campaigns, fun trends we can tap into. I'm all ears.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to be thinking about it and ways to make it fun. But keep sharing, and please go follow Start Genetic. Share their content when you see it, please. It really makes a difference. You don't have to comment. You don't have to post it anywhere. Just sharing it simply, even in your story or on your LinkedIn, is going to reach at least one person. And that's enough. So
Yes.
Don't feel like you
Thank
have to like make a big long post about anything. If all you have time for is to repost it, that is super helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for saying that. We just want people we want eyes on the content. And if you can repost it, that's amazing. If you want to go that extra step and post about your personal story with genetic testing, we certainly welcome that as well.
Yes, always consider sharing your genetic testing story. It's so, so important. Geraldine, is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? I feel like I took this a couple, veered in, hard right turns the whole time. So I might have missed something.
It's good. There's, as you know, genetic testing spans a lot of different things, right? And genetic diagnoses mean a lot of things. Anyway, thank you so much for including me and inviting me to talk about Start Genetic. And I just want to encourage everybody to follow Start Genetic, share your genetic story, and let's, do what we can to, try to help more people get the diagnosis underlying their disease.
Yep, absolutely. And if it's been 2 years and you didn't have a diagnosis from your genetic test, ask for it to be reanalyzed because they find new genes every year. So don't ever think that just because there wasn't an answer that there will never be an answer. So check into having it reanalyzed. Usually you can get it done once for free. That includes sort of the first time around. But anyway, Geraldine, thank you for being my guest and taking the time. And so much thank you for the heavy lift of creating Start Genetic. And the website looks so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Too.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks again for having me on.
My pleasure.
I love what you do, Effie.
Okay, I love what you do. Yeah, you can go take care of your handsome Charles now. And
okay,
we will share this episode soon.
Thank you.
I hope you've been enjoying this podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this show with your people, and please make sure to rate and review it on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also head over to Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to connect with me and stay updated on the show. If you're interested in sharing your story, or if you have anything you would like to contribute, please submit it to my website at effieparks.com. Thank you so much for listening to the show and for supporting me along the way. I appreciate y'all so much. I don't know what kind of day you're having, but if you need a little pick-me-up, Ford's got you.